Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Greetings of peace and welcome to ING's webinar series on Muslim African Americans titled Expanding Muslim American Experiences Beyond the Immigrant Story. The title for the series provides the context, which is aimed for immigrant Muslim communities to learn more about the long history of Muslims in America and the many contributions of African Americans to that history, a topic that's not widely known, but what we are planning to explore in this series. ING comes to the conversation through our work countering Islamophobia by teaching the public about and facilitating engagement with Muslim Americans. And so we're here about to engage with esteemed Muslim African American scholars and leaders to learn more about their important history and contributions in the context of both the Muslim American community and the larger American public. For the Muslims watching, this series is a great opportunity to learn more about ourselves first and foremost, as well as the intersections of religion and race, which will help us to do a better job in countering not only Islamophobia, but all forms of bigotry and racism. And we welcome your participation, and we hope that we can all benefit from this knowledge that will help us promote greater inclusion, mutual respect, understanding, and harmony in the United States. And so that brings us to our second panel in the series, where we will be discussing an overview of African American Muslim communities in the United States, including their major institutions and the many contributions they've made to the United States, to Islam and Muslim communities everywhere. With us today are myself, Ishaq Patan, the Bay Area Director of ING, and Maha Al-Junaidi, the Executive Director, moderating a conversation between our three friends and esteemed scholars, Imam Zaid Shakir, the co-founder of Zaytuna College and renowned Muslim author and speaker, Imam Fahim Shuaib, the resident Imam of the Warathin Mosque in Oakland for 36 years, and Dr. Jamila Karim, the former professor of religion at Spelman College, an author, speaker, and blogger with specialties in Islam and Muslims in the United States, Islamic feminism, race, and ethnicity. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We're going to start off our evening with a question for you, Imam Zaid. And that question is, can you provide us with an overview of institutions of the historically Orthodox Muslim communities, such as the Dar es Salaam movement and other communities that have flourished on the East Coast and elsewhere?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, wa salatu wa salam ala sayyidil mursaleen, sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, there have been a lot of Muslim organizations, institutions, individuals, leaders emanating from the African American community and rooted in the African American experience here in this country. Of course, it all begins with the enslaved Muslims of African descent, who were between estimates, conservative estimate, 20% of the enslaved population. So 1 in every 5 slaves was a Muslim, and the Muslims, of course, left an indelible imprint on this country historically, and that's another story. Their Islam, though, and Dr. Sylviane Diouf and others talk about how with the end of slavery, because Muslims generally, until the 19th century, where you had the rise of Christian evangelicalism, and the British colonies. The British colonies generally are a lot more open than the French colonies. And so Muslims in British, enslaved under the British, were generally free to practice their religion if they had the energy and the strength after toiling and even to fast Ramadan on a starvation diet. But in the 19th century, that began to change. But Muslims, despite the ability to practice the religion as is documented, Muslims praying, Muslims reading Quran, Muslims securing Qurans from Africa, all of that is documented. But Muslims could not, in the context of slavery, develop institutions. And Islam being a knowledge-based religion without proper institutions, with the end of slavery, and no new slaves coming from Africa or up from the Caribbean, generally Islam died out. But you have vestiges as documented by the Works Progress Administration, WPA studies, and the coastal islands off the coast of Georgia and South Carolina, where especially particularly the Bilali family and the rice cakes that they still made, mentioning of their grandparents or even their parents praying 3, 4, 5 times a day facing the east to Mecca. So you had those vestiges, but you had a revival in the 20th century with the northern migration as African-American community, not totally, but large segments migrated north to escape the institutionalized slavery, terror rather, that was designed to undo the political gains of African Americans during Reconstruction. The South Carolina State House was majority African American during State Senate during Reconstruction. You had African American national federal senators, Congress people, and it was too much for the Confederacy, the former Confederacy and the old order. And so people were put back in their place and fleeing that terror, also seeking jobs in the factories of the North. You had displaced communities in northern ghettos that in many instances were scenes of racism, poverty, as bad or worse than anything to be found in the South. And one of the consequences of that, though, was people were uprooted from their social support system. And at the heart of that social support system, the extended family and the Black church. And in the absence of those two institutions, many people began to explore other means of religious expression and also means to deal with the stultifying oppressive conditions of the northern ghettos. And that led to an exploration of Islam. And so the first institutional manifestation of that was probably Noble Drew Ali and the Moore Science Temple. So there wasn't much Islam in there, but it was an association and introduction of terminology associated with Islam, such as Moors and the Quran and Islam itself. So you had the beginning of institutional development. And the Moore Science Temple would remain a significant institution for most of the first 2/3 of the 20th century in African-American community. After that, you had the UNIA, Marcus Garvey's movement, which wasn't formally Islamic, but it was influenced deeply by Islam, particularly by the influence of an individual by the name of Wd Muhammad Ali, who was a Sudanese Egyptian, so Maha should be happy, individual who migrated from Egypt to London to study theater, but also he was also a skilled journalist. So he founded Pan-African and Pan-Islamic newspaper. And Marcus Garvey came from Jamaica to England. He met Wd Muhammad. He worked at Wd Muhammad's newspaper, and he was mentored by Wd Muhammad. So Marcus Garvey was mentored by a Muslim. When Garvey went to New York, Wd Muhammad would go on to Detroit, Michigan. In Detroit, he founded 2 Islamic organizations, the Universal Islamic Society and the American Asian Society. And so wherever these very talented, dynamic individuals of African descent went in this country, they immediately began building institutions, and they immediately began either establishing or supporting newspapers and other publications. Now, Wd Muhammad, so he established the Universal Islamic Society and the American Asian Society. American Asian Society was a platform for African-American Muslims to join forces with Muslims from the Indian subcontinent. And the most influential Muslim from the subcontinent in the 1920s, so we're talking the 1920s right now, was Mufti Muhammad Sadiq, who was an Ahmadiyya missionary, a very learned scholar, Dr. Mufti Muhammad Sadiq. So he was a doctor a PhD. He was a mufti. He was formally trained, and he had a very strong anti-racist message, as did Dusay Muhammad Ali. I have a passage, in fact, it was in the PowerPoint. We don't need to waste time trying to pull that up, but let me see if I could just get to this passage, inshallah ta'ala, and just read it. You can get an idea of the kind of dawah that both Dusay Muhammad and Mufti Muhammad Sadiq was making. So here's the passage. So he says very openly, apart from, and this article was in a newspaper that Dr. Mufti Muhammad Sadiq started, called them a Muslim, M-O-S-L-E-M, Muslim Sunrise. So in a particular article, and this sort of rhetoric was very, very popular in his publication. Apart from confederation of the African tribes or people of African origin, the possibility of which is a nightmare to the white man, he lives in fear and trembling of Islam, that Islam may become the religion of the Negro. And why should it not be? Islam would be a wonderful spiritual force in the life of the colored races, uniting us in a bond of common sympathy and interest. We could then add to our motto of one God, one aim, one destiny, the words one language, which would be Arabic. It could easily be made the universal language of Negroes and would remove the barriers which now face us in the intercommunication of the different tribes in Africa. Arabic is already spoken by millions of Negroes. So that's just an example of the kind of message that both Mufti Muhammad Sadiq, who would move on to Detroit, was propagating with Dusay Muhammad Ali. And many of these articles, I had one, I didn't have time to put in the presentation, were published in the Morning Star, the newspaper of Marcus Garvey's movement, the United Negro Improvement Association. So you had tremendous interconnectivity between these movements, these individuals, even the ones that weren't formally Muslim. So I probably have 3 minutes left. So very quickly, in the 20s, you also had the emergence of Sheikh Dawood Faisal. And the interesting thing, so in my presentation, I use Sunni Islam in quotations to distinguish from the members and followers in the community of Imam Wd Muhammad, which is Sunni Islam, but it's another trajectory. And so I use Sunni in quotations. But that Sunni Islam, it was always in the African-American community. So this is the non-Nation of Islam trajectory. And of course, the nation was the biggest. So we don't want to misrepresent that particular fact. But it was always influenced by international movements. And that could be a detriment. So Dusay Muhammad, Egypt, England, United States. Mufti Muhammad Sadiq, India, United States. Sheikh Dawood Faisal and Mother Khadija, who started their dawah in the 20s, and then we were very active in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and into the 60s. From the Caribbean to the United States. It's very important to note, this is understudied, that Sheikh Dawood Faisal was a muqaddam, an authorized representative of the Algerian Shadili Mujaddid, if you will, Sheikh Al-Alawi. So Sheikh Dawood Faisal was a muqaddam of Sheikh Al-Alawi, and that's a very who is based in Algeria. And so this is a very important historical note. So he was a Sufi, if you will. And so that connection, but that international connection was there. If we move from him, Dr. Muhammad Izzuddin, and so Brooklyn, New York, Sheikh Dawood, Mother Khadija. Detroit, Dusay Muhammad and Mufti Muhammad Sadiq. Brooklyn, New York, we mentioned that. Philadelphia, Dr. Muhammad Izzuddin. Dr. Muhammad Izzuddin was another Sunni, African-American Sunni, who started an institution. His institutions were villages. And so you had Izzuddin villages. You had one in southern New Jersey outside of Philly. You had one in upstate New York. You had one in Ohio, and you had one in Michigan. And so these were agricultural communes, which gave a new spin to do for self. So people would actually move out of the city into these Muslim villages that were practicing Islam, farming. Those are very powerful institutions. They did, though, tend to die out after the founders died, because the children would generally move back into the city. They weren't feeling the country life, if you will. And I think you have that phenomenon in the Delta, the community in Mississippi, the followers of the Imam Muhammad, rahimahullah, who established an agrarian village in the Delta in Mississippi, the same phenomenon of the children moving to the city. So you see all over the Northeast, particularly, and a wider area into the Midwest. Midwest, you had Sheikh Wali Akram, one of the leading students of Mufti Muhammad Sadiq, who was a very intelligent engineer, African-American engineer, Sheikh Wali Akram. Very dedicated followers. But Mufti Muhammad Sadiq, though, was very learned. He was a mufti, he was a PhD, he was very well educated in the religion. When he left, his Khalifa, if you will, the one who took his place, wasn't fluent in Arabic, wasn't nearly as learned. And so the African American, in fact, he tried to teach the brothers and sisters Urdu. And all due respect to Ishaq, most converts want to learn Arabic, and so they weren't feeling Urdu. So what happened, they drifted away from the Ahmadi movement altogether and began to establish a network of African-American Sunni communities. And one of the most prominent of those leaders was Sheikh Wali Akram, and the institution was the first Cleveland mosque, which exists to this day and is very active to this day. Under the leadership of Imam, Allahumma salli Rasulillah. I forget, I know the Imam personally, but I'm having a senior moment. But in any case, so you see in Cleveland and Pittsburgh, you had the first Pittsburgh Masjid, the first Cleveland Masjid. So you had in Buffalo, New York, you had a series of masjids that were established by people coming out of the Ahmadiyya movement and coming into Sunni Islam. And this is talked about by Danin, Black Pilgrimage to Islam, very important book. So coming, and I'll stop here, as you move into the 60s and 70s, Sheikh Dawood's movement is surpassed or eclipsed, a better word, in Brooklyn by the Darul Islam movement, Sheikh Yahya Abdul Karim and others. Eventually, Imam Jamil joins up with that movement. And when the split in the movement occurs, a Pakistani sheikh who's still alive, I'm forgetting these names. In any case, he literally takes over an entire branch of the movement. They become the fuqara, or more in Western vernacular, the fuqara. And they also established agricultural communes, which are functioning to this day. One was present outside of Fresno for a long time. I'm sure Imam Fahim's familiar with the brothers and sisters who were involved in that, but they consolidated with the community in South Carolina. You have one in upstate New York, but the branch that didn't go with Sheikh Jilani from Pakistan, and he encouraged them to drop everything, go to Afghanistan, fight in the jihad. Some of them were arrested at the border trying to get into Afghanistan. It was somewhat of a debacle. But those who didn't go with Sheikh Jilani, Imam Jamil led that movement, which eventually became just the followers of Imam Jamil and just moved away from the Darul Islam. You also, that's based in Atlanta. You have Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Brooklyn, Atlanta. In Washington, D.C., you had a follower of Maulana Maududi, Muzaffarullah, Hamiduddin Muzaffarullah, who started the Islamic Party in North America, which was an African-American inner city street dawah, very powerful movement, but localized. And that's has its own history, which time doesn't allow. But again, you can see the international influence. And Muzaffaruddin Hamidullah would go and correspond directly, go to Pakistan, sit with Maulana Maududi, get instructions, go review some of his books and teachings personally with him. And so you have these various movements, and the vestiges of these movements are still around, but the full power and force, I would say, generally has significantly died down, if not disappeared. I think the Islamic Party, the leadership sold the masjid that Gaddafi paid for in Washington, D.C. to the Pan-Africanists, and then skipped town to Atlanta, and then subsequently to the Caribbean. And so these are, and then it died out. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Imam Zaid. There's so much more that you can probably say. This was absolutely edifying and very inspiring. You know, another organization called the Medina Institute did a 2-hour webinar on the history of the Orthodox, or what you call the Sunni African-American Muslim community, going back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, which I also found to be very beneficial to watch. And it's probably something that we're going to link to as well, for people to get a full picture of the history of the Orthodox African Islam in the country. And I walked away from that webinar, as I am from your talk just now, thinking that we really shouldn't be talking about African American Islam anymore as if it's a separate entity from the larger American Muslim body, but rather we should be talking about the one body of American Islam and the contributions that each group makes to that one body. And in our case today, of course, we're talking about African American Muslims, which according to recent polls tell us that they represent about 30% of American Muslims. That's 1 out of 3 Muslim Americans is African American, and that's an important population to know about and to understand the history of. Yeah. So not only can I now trace my roots back to the enslaved Muslim Africans, but also to the early African American Muslim pioneers that practice Islam as I do today. Now, one of those groups that
we're all in this together. This cross-pollination. Exactly. I took my shahada in the Masjid of Imam Wd Muhammad in Shreveport, Louisiana.
MashaAllah. So that's a good segue. You know, one of the groups that contributed to Islam in America is absolutely the Wd Muhammad community, which is the largest of African American Muslim communities in the country. I happen to be very familiar with that community because I used to attend Imam Fahim's mosque in Oakland for many years. So now I'm going to turn it over to Imam Fahim. Imam Fahim, in the last webinar, you discussed a little bit about the history of the Nation of Islam and the move that they make to what I call Orthodox Islam through the leadership of Imam Wd Muhammad. So today I would like you to elaborate a lot more on that community and to tell us a little bit about what that community looks like today in terms of its institution and its people. And I know that you prepared a PowerPoint. So Ishaq, I'm going to ask you to please give Imam Fahim the power to be able to share his PowerPoint.
Okay.
You should be able to share, Imam Fahim.
Alhamdulillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Sayyidina Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Dear brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Alhamdulillah, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. We have an Imam Zaid sighting that makes the whole trip worth it. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. I haven't seen my brother in too long. It's always a pleasure. Alhamdulillah, as you should see on the note there, this is a keyhole view of the continuation from the legacy of Imam Wd Muhammad. And I use that imagery to say, no matter what I show, it's going to be such a small sliver of that work. And I do have to apologize to everyone associated with myself, Imam Wd Muhammad, and the community, because I know that this does not cover all, to put it lightly, of who we are and what we are. And this as I move through it, this is critical to understand, because the choice and the wisdom of the Imam in decentralizing is critical. That's really where the strength of Imam Muhammad's community and its longevity lies, in the decentralization. There is no head to cut off. There is no bag to put a titular leader in so that they can be used to manipulate everybody. Each individual has been left the same legacy and the same autonomy and the same freedom, same information, same access, and they have each done what their potential has led and allowed them to accomplish. And so these are just some examples of it. These are not the sum all be all. So I'm apologizing to everybody connected with this from the start. All right, everything, you know, why did he mention her? Why did he not mention him? Why did he mention that city? That city wasn't even included. So I'm just anticipating all of this. But alhamdulillah, keeping it in the role of, let's simply say what we're going to say today and go here. Here's Muhammad's Mosque number 4. You know, the number 1 was Detroit. The temples would get names, or pardon me, they would get numbers. So Muhammad's Mosque number 1 was in Detroit. Number 2 was in Chicago. Number 3 was in Milwaukee. Number 4 was in Washington, D.C. And as you see here in the dedication plate, it was founded by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in 1937 and was erected in 1960. And it is today on Islamic Way in Washington, D.C. It's led currently by Dr. Imam Talib Sharif, Imam Doctor we prefer to say, Imam Dr. Talib Sharif of Washington, D.C. He's a retired Master Sergeant, forget which branch of the military, retired from. He has a very, very extensive global interfaith activity. Just he's really, really profound in his work. Both there, the community there is known by the appellation the nation's mosques and mosque, not because it is a part of the nation, but much like the National Cathedral and other locations there in the capital city, that appellation applies there. And so, of course, you see him there to the right at the dinner, which there's some other person there that we know about. So he was there as well. Very, very significant individual. This is basically, what do you call it, breaking news kind of thing. He received the association and collaboration that you see identified there, $40 million from, well, in Washington, D.C., let's put it like that, to build this, the Clara on MLK. And you see the details there. Actually, the way that these faces are, okay, good, got it out of the way. So you can see, people, you can read, 81 residential units, first floor retail, underground parking, jobs for Ward 8 and DC residents, and also contracts for Ward 8 and DC businesses. And you can see that it is a collaboration between Banneker Ventures, Masjid Muhammad, as they're known officially, and also Medina Life, CDC. So that's something to look forward. And of course, you know, the Clara means it's a reference to Clara Muhammad, who was the woman, who was she quote unquote ran the nation while Elijah Muhammad was on the run from the beginning of his work, and that's another story in and of itself. For some reason, Okay, let's go. All right, here's another community. Here's Imam Abdul Karim Hassan in those very early days. He came from out there in Zaid country early on. What was it, Connecticut? I believe New Haven, Connecticut. And this was the old building, what was known as Temple number 27 in Los Angeles. Los Angeles was one of the regional headquarters for the entire nation. And Abdul Karim Hassan came there as a minister in the early 70s and has been there since that time. This is the projected building. It's about 90% complete now. This is an early reference pictures and the like for it. This is the rendering of it. This building actually exists right now, and this is it. And they have a charter school there that serves the general community there in South Central LA. And so again, it has 60 years of history in Los Angeles. And also this is Masjid Bilal Islamic Center. So you see it has a very, very rich history. And that history, Imam Abdul Karim Hassan lays out in his book, Our Family's Evolution from Nationalism to Al-Islam. As Imam Zaid spoke of, Marcus Garvey and Noble Drew Ali, Imam Abdul Karim Hassan's family came through both of those strands, came under those particular influences, and of course, finally rested in the Nation of Islam. Imam Abdul Karim Hassan is 89 years old. When you see him, you don't get that from him, and he's ever busy. I've always only ever known him as someone who's very, very busy. So his book is that. Here's a little side note. I heard one of the speakers speaking from a position of quote unquote of credentialed authority. I'm trying not to label anybody as much if I can avoid it. He said Elijah Muhammad was a Prince Hall Mason. He said Elijah Muhammad was a Prince Hall Mason. I mean, so many other things he said was, okay, it was good. But then when you say Elijah Muhammad is a Prince Hall Mason, I take it that it's probably because this picture, they've seen this picture, and so I say, okay, we must be a Mason wearing a faith. Elijah Muhammad was never a Freemason. In fact, we used to call the Masons my son. We used to talk about 32 degrees, he's got 32 degrees. Say, well, that's freezing. Well, what you gonna get for 32 degrees? We got 360 degrees, but I digress. Malcolm Shabazz Mosque in New York, currently under the leadership of Imam Ezekiel Pasha, and who's been there. I think he's been its leader for some time. I know for some time. I'm trying to put a number on it. I'm sorry, I wouldn't get it right, but at minimum, shortly after the life of the leadership of Imam Muhammad, that is. So I'll just say 31 years, and I'll stand to be corrected in terms of that. This, of course, is a picture of young Wallace Muhammad conferring during one of the Savior's days, apparently, with Malcolm X at that time, who, of course, Malcolm confirmed that what Wallace was saying about the life and the future of the Nation of Islam resting in coming to true al-Islam as represented in the autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley. So they were close, and the Imam had a great admiration for Malcolm. And in fact, when Malcolm separated from the Nation of Islam, Wallace at the time was out of the Nation of Islam, and a part of his indictment was had been an influence on Malcolm, and not quote unquote not a positive one with relationship to the objects of the Nation of Islam, as it were. In fact, and he came to Wallace Muhammad first at that time, after that separation, to ask him to be the Imam of what was it? The Mosque Incorporated or something like that. Out of those two organizations, part of it was separated politically, and the other part was going to be religious. And he had sought to invite Imam Muhammad to do that. Of course, Imam Muhammad declined, and other details can be brought out later. But this work, the temple number 7, which was the Harlem Temple, the Harlem Mosque, after Imam Muhammad, it was renamed Malcolm Shabazz Mosque, and it's under that leadership. And I should also mention that Ali Rashid, Imam Ali Rashid, rahimahullah alayhi, became the imam there after the transition, and he was also from Los Angeles, California. But this is a before and after. Now, this structure here, this structure is a structure that was built, and you see it's Malcolm X Boulevard. This is the beginning. This is Malcolm Shabazz Mosque before this structure went up, and this is a structure. I don't know how many stories it is. It looks to be at least like 15 or so there, and that's the work of Imam Ezekiel Pasha. He has many other works. The Inkster in Michigan, which he has an annual convention there as well, and residential purchases that are bought around a high school that they've actually brought there. So go to the Malcolm Shabazz website, and there's so much more is being done, but I have to hasten on. We run out of time. Imam Dr. Wazir Ali, he is a model in so many ways. He is the imam of two masjids. One is the Mercy Community Center that holds also Masjid al-Quran, and also the historic mosque and built from the ground, meaning that the historic Houston Mosque that was there and has had leadership of such as Imam Ibrahim Kamaluddin, and also who also came from Chicago. There are other leaders. So again, I already said, forgive me for not mentioning everybody. Prior to Imam Wazir Ali, of course, is Imam Qasim Ahmed, rahimahullah alayhi. And he himself, Imam Dr. Wazir Ali, he's also the son of a pioneer in the community. So that thesis is held on to and through him. I want to give a little bit of that pedigree. The community in Houston is Masjid Wd Muhammad. Also, Masjid al-Quran is the other location wherein Imam Dr. Wazir Ali is the resident imam. But the Masjid al-Quran, just as a point, it mainly came to birth because of the particular needs and location for quote unquote immigrant Muslims. So that's the community that it largely serves. But the imam is imam from the community of Imam Wd Muhammad. Alhamdulillah. Ibrahim Kamaluddin Community Center is being built. They already have the prefab material. They have the acreage and all that's going up post-COVID, I guess, as things go on. They've acquired 3 major properties around the Houston area, and also have given birth to Islamic centers in the Houston area as well, and are being led by those who are imams from either the class or former assistants in the Houston Masjid. Ibrahim Islamic Center, 5th Ward Islamic Center, New Africa Islamic Center for Human Development. His father was Otis Kaleem Ali, which was one of those that moved around the country from Fresno to Portland to Phoenix and all these other cities, establishing that, and they did not have a small family as well. I believe there were probably at least, I'm gonna be conservative, there were at least 7 children in Imam Wazir's family. Moving on, Imam Qasim was really the prime mentor after his father, Imam Qasim Ahmed, who himself was originally in Chicago, originally assistant to Imam Wd Muhammad, moved around the country, establishing, strengthening communities, and more particularly teaching the Quran. And he was studying Quran in Arabic before the transition in the Nation of Islam. And he was mocked in so many ways for that. But by the grace of Allah, it's been a great benefit to our community, that foreknowledge that he had an appetite for the study of the Quran. The great Atlanta Masjid of Al-Islam It's just phenomenal. I just have to move on to say what I can say. You have Imam Suleiman Hamid, mashallah. I'm going to make him a San Jose product because that's where his father's from. He could be a Berkeley product because they were raised in Berkeley, but then he could also be an Oakland product because he came through the Claire Muhammad School, of which his mother was the principal, Rahimahullah alayh, for most of my administration. And of course, many of you may know about Hajj Pros, which is really an elite Hajj guide group, etc. And mashallah, nothing but COVID cut it off this year. Alhamdulillah. Also, and he's also one of those students from that went to Syria as well. But I say the Atlanta Masjid, Claire Muhammad School, Wd Muhammad High. I think one of them is online with us. Online with us right now. These are just some of the, that's all I can say, the human products. There are so many degrees and so much talent, so much professionalism that has been born out of that community. It's just marvelous. Now, in the Imam also, the Imam, Assistant Imam there in Atlanta is Imam Rashad Abdul, a product of the direct tutelage, direct training, direct teaching of Imam Wd Muhammad. And it shows in everything that he does. These Quran study and leadership classes that are to begin September 20th and last for a year are just a small slither of what's there. Also, to speak of students that are direct students of Imam Wd Muhammad, flesh and blood, warm breath, learned people from him, of course, Khadija Sadiq Muhammad, who was the wife of Imam Muhammad at the time of Imam Muhammad's passing. She continues to move on in her aspects of education. She's establishing a university in our community. That's an LLC, and you can get to that by going to sunicom.org. It's worth getting to. I'm not going to read the details here, but I'll mention again Kalima Aziz Rashada, who is also one of those students, one of those direct students of Imam Muhammad that are really, really profound, rich, and deep. Student, product of Wd Muhammad High School and that legacy, who also comes from someone who was, like Imam Suleiman's father, was one of the greatest Muhammad speak salesmen in the history of the game, if you will. These are children of thoroughbreds, and you get this also with Sharif Abdul Malik. Again, high school sweetheart. He married her. They're still married. I think they're 6 or 7 years into their marriage now. And We Buy Black is a national phenomenon. This again is a product of Imam Wd Muhammad, product of Claire Muhammad School, Wd Muhammad High. It's just really, really marvelous. This is a local product. The purpose of the She Win, We Win organization is to combat poverty by providing a marketplace for women business owners to sell their goods and services by utilizing a restorative justice model to implement financial, educational, and social welfare programming that uplifts and encourages women. So you can get to She Win, We Win. That's also this young lady right here. Let me see, can I point to it? This young lady right here is the founder and mover and shaker of She Win, We Win. And she looks a little familiar. Kind of looks like my firstborn. I'm not sure. I think that's Camila Mahasashir. I got to check my records and see if that's who that is. But alhamdulillah, also International Museum of Muslim Culture, Jackson, Mississippi, co-founded by Okola Rashid, Imad at Turk. This is in Jackson, Mississippi. Alhamdulillah, a marvelous extension of the expanding ideas that come from Imam Wd Muhammad. Study al-Islam, which Imam Zaid and the Zaytuna Institute stepped out and made available a platform, the first of its kind in reality, an academic examination of Elijah Muhammad's contribution to the ministry of Imam Wd Muhammad. Fitra Muhammad, who is the leader of that and also a part of the team for the $40 million in DC, is the leader of Study al-Islam, which is something that you can get to. This is her daughter here, Naima Muhammad, who's a singer and songwriter, and she provided the entertainment at the Media Awards event honoring the voices of courage and conscience last April at the Beverly Hilton. This young lady is an Oakland product, and she is the writer, director, producer of the Jinn, the movie Jinn. That was also a very, very wonderful mainline broadcast piece, and she was awarded as a producer director in that. Of course, you have the Muhammad Speaks, formerly Muhammad Speaks, then Bilalian News, now Muslim Journal, and it's been led for the past 30 plus years by Aisha K. Mustafa. And I think this is a very appropriate statement here because she lives it. Life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Now that's how you go about dealing with that. There she is here, and one of the annual events that I look forward to by members in the Association of Imam Wd Muhammad is a time to be grateful. And a time to be grateful happens usually around the Christmas period of time in different locales in the United States. She is associate professor at Tougaloo College in journalism. AM 360 is a 24/7 broadcast platform that was established by Imam Thomas Abdul Salam, who passed away in 2015, alhamdulillah, but it still exists. And if you want to see a sampling of the continuing voices and intellects of the community of Imam Muhammad, check in with AM 360. I know I'm moving through. It's going to be done. Here, Muslim American Logic Institute. This is Imam Salim Mu'min of Detroit. Imam Salim Mu'min is also a real, not an honorary, he is a real chief of the Bisa people. I think I got that name right. He is known as the progressive chief. He has an actual function with those people in Ghana. And what has happened is he has built a school with the help of those who made contribution to it in Nima in Accra, Ghana. This is Imam Salim Mu'min here and his constant companion, Brother Azam. And this is a fulfillment of what was envisioned in the Nation of Islam, of the hands reaching from African Americans across to the brothers and sisters in Africa and uniting in our progress and our work and our activity. There's an annual Quranic conference that is conducted. We would have been in Philadelphia this year, but of course, because of COVID, we weren't there. But annually we have that event. Let's move. This is the current Imam of Philadelphia. Now, anybody who's looking at the history of Philadelphia and Muslims, etc., then there's a very, very rich cross current right there in Philadelphia for all of African American Muslims in there. And along with which Imam Muhammad was in the Nation of Islam, he was the minister of what's called Temple number 12, which he says this was also the place that he first met Farad there himself in Philadelphia. And now the current leader of the current Imam of Masjidullah, which is a very active progressive community, is Imam Idris Abdul Zahir. And Idris is the son of an Imam from that community and a very strong community in Freehaven, New Jersey. This is his wife, who is also the daughter of Sheikh Kenneth Muhammad, the granddaughter of Sheikh Kenneth Muhammad, the daughter of Oliver Muhammad and Dr. Rhonda Muhammad, a very profound family. Her brothers are very active. One of her brothers is an Imam and chaplain. And so alhamdulillah, her father is a chaplain. So here you have this intergenerational connection of that richness. And they're Muhammad Ali stories I could tell you, but we don't have time. Keith Ellison, Minneapolis is where the George Floyd thing happened. His Imam, Keith Ellison's Imam, is this brother, Makram Al-Amin, who also has his own footprint that is an international footprint as well, doing a lot of work to help the homeless, to feed the hungry, built the masjid there in Minneapolis as well. And also he's the son of a former captain of the Nation of Islam, and his mother was one of the secretaries of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So we're again talking about pedigree and thoroughbred right here. David Shaheed, Judge David Shaheed, one of those former Muslim Muhammad Speak newspaper salesmen that sit on the bench right now. And I didn't mention Imam Pleman El-Amin's daughter, who is among the first of the graduates of the Claire Muhammad School at Wd Muhammad High, and who also is a judge there in Atlanta. This is Imam Mikhail Sahir, and of course you know Congressman Andre Carson, and these both, this is their Imam Mikhail Sahir. These books are just a sampling of the books that Imam Ronald Shaheed here, and this is Imam Ghani. They would have regular Thursday interviews with the Imam over a number of years. I don't know how many years, but now Imam Ronald has been producing these books, which are transcriptions of Imam Muhammad's conversations with them. Very, very rich, very, very profound. And that's just a small example of that. A couple of places where you can go to be in touch with that legacy, that language, that knowledge of Imam Muhammad is New Africa Radio, and also the Imam Wd Muhammad Study Library. There are just massive amounts of information that are available for those who want to know what it's about. I mean, there are many of us, myself included, you have tens of thousands of pages of transcripts from the Imam, tens of thousands of hours of lecture from Imam Muhammad. And so you can get to that by going to these two sites as well. Now, our sister, Dr. Ramona Zakia Muhammad, who passed away last year, rahimahullah, soon you will be receiving, by the grace of Allah, inshallah, will be receiving a publication that she has done rich, in-depth, rigorous research to bring us the history of the mother of the nation, Clara Evans Muhammad. And it's really, truly her legacy. And so inshallah, we'll be getting that piece, because that is something that is missing from the literature. This great woman who she introduced Elijah Muhammad to Farad Muhammad. It wasn't the other way around. She was the one that took him to where it was. And we have our freshly minted PhD, Dr. Hanifa Mahassan Shuaib Peters. This picture of her is as a Claire Muhammad School student back in the day. And this right here was yesterday. Yesterday, she defended her dissertation successfully and was crowned. Alhamdulillah, we're deeply proud of that. She's the first in the whole line of her husband's family, my wife's family, the first PhD. This is the extension of that legacy of the Nation of Islam, the Honorable Imam Wd Muhammad. I promise you there are only 2 more plates there, and I thank you all for your patience. Now these two, Safir Rab, Imam Safir Rab II, and Intisar Rab. I mean, these are stellar. Now, these happen to be at the end. It was just like, but I left everything really open-ended. But these are stars by anybody's measure. They're stars by anybody's measure. Safir, Master's in Business Administration degree at Johns Hopkins University, Bachelor's of Arts, Political Science major, University of Maryland, College Park. And also Intisar, you need a whole page for her, and I do have almost a page for her. But here's Imam Rab right there with President Barack Obama. As you see that he's the founder, CEO, and Managing Opportunity, Inc., and also a consultant in President Obama's transition team. And FYI, talking out of school, he's still consulting would-be presidents. Enough said. I believe that like that. And Intisar, Professor Intisar Rab, here you see her pictured with the late John Lewis and also Lenny Guinier, who was the first woman of color tenured professor at Harvard University. And I didn't check my notes, but I think Intisar was the youngest tenured professor, is the youngest tenured professor at Harvard as well. So she's very, very astounding. I know that it takes 1 minute to read this piece right here, and this is only half of it, so I can count on 1 minute. Listen, please. Intisar Rab is a professor of law, professor of history, and a faculty director of the program in Islamic law at Harvard Law School. She has held appointments as the Susan S. and Kenneth L. Wallach Professor at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Studies, as an associate professor at New York University Department of Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies, and at NYU Law School, and as assistant professor at Boston College Law School. She previously served as a law clerk for Judge Thomas L. Ambro of the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, as a Temple Bar Fellow in London with the American Inns of Court, and as a Carnegie Scholar for her work on contemporary Islamic law. In 2015, in partnership with the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society, support from the Luce and MacArthur Foundations, and collaborations with myriad scholars and institutions, she launched Sharia Source, an online portal designed to provide universal access to the world's information on Islamic law and history, and to facilitate new research with the use of AI tools. All right, so that's it. So much more to be said, but I do have to mention there's so many students that from that Syria experience that augmenting that with their institutional education and that pedigree, that history, it's just phenomenal. And again, that's just scratching the surface. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Imam Fahim. I'm actually out of breath. I'm actually blown away by everything that you presented. I had no idea the breadth of the WD Muhammad community. I'm embarrassed that I didn't know much of this. I'm also sad that this wasn't exposed to us at the number of ISNA conventions that we've had, and I don't know why we don't know this. But
Maha at the time.
Yeah.
So now we have a Maha. So now we have.
Oh my God, I'm nothing. I'm a nobody. But I'm hoping that this is going to be the start. Young people, this next generation is going to start documenting this stuff, and there's going to be much more interaction that happens, because this is magnificent. Of course, you didn't talk about yourself, and you didn't talk about Imam Abu Qadr al-Amin. You have remarkable institutions in the Bay Area that I've always depended on in so many ways. Imam Zaid, did you want to say something? Did you? No. Okay.
No.
Okay,
I
you're
was
fine.
going to say takbir a couple times.
Yeah. Mashallah. Mashallah. Okay. Yeah. So thank you so much. May Allah reward you, Imam Fahim.
I typed in the chat that Safir Rab is running for Congress.
That's right.
Well, he just ran. He didn't win the seat.
On the primary. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Mashallah, mashallah. So Dr. Jamila, you're up next, and I don't want you to worry about the time. I think that this is really captivating. I think people are going to watch this, so don't worry about the time. I want you to go through your presentation. And I wanted to begin by saying that when I was a new practicing Muslim 28 years ago, attending the mosques run by Imam Abu Qadr al-Amin in San Francisco and Imam Fahim in Oakland, I noticed that there were equal numbers of women to men attending Jumu'ah prayers, the equal space that they had to men in those prayers, the lack of a barrier between men and women, the visibility the women had at these mosques, the strength of the women that were there. For one, they stood tall. They were very active in the community, which was starkly different from what I saw in immigrant mosques 20 years ago, where not only were women sitting behind walls or barriers, but they were also very meek and not very much involved in all. And so naturally, I gravitated towards the African-American Muslim communities as an American, as an Egyptian, as an Arab woman who was raised to have a strong voice, be assertive, hold on a job, etc. So my question to you is, how did African-American Muslim women become so advanced in Muslim spaces ahead of their immigrant sisters, which I think by now have most definitely caught up? And I want you to give us a glimpse of some of the female thought leaders and female founded and run organizations in the African-American Muslim community today. So Dr. Jamila, please take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Maha. That's a great question. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Yeah, so before I really dig in, I thought I'd give a visual through my PowerPoint of what you just described. So here we have the most important masjid out of those mentioned in Imam Fahim's presentation. And that's a joke, but this is the masjid that I grew up in under the leadership of Imam Wd Muhammad right here in Atlanta, Georgia. And you can see a visual of the free exchange of men and women. Also, I would like to point out just the vibrancy of the Muslim women's dress. I think that's also something that has really characterized our communities. So here within the masjid, in the musalla space, we see that there is no partition between the men and women. You have a woman you see marking her space. And of course, you're always going to find men outnumbering women in the masjid just because of Islam's encouraging men to pray in the mosque. At the same time, though, as we'll see in this photo, Muslim women, and particularly looking at this community under the leadership of Imam Wd Muhammad, Muslim women, nonetheless, they make up a large force and presence in the musalla, in the worship space. And this is at Jumu'ah. So I would say that at least the women are at least 45 to 50% of the congregants there. And this really speaks to the Americanness of African-American Muslim experience. And especially being Black American, we're talking about the way that these women, and especially I'm talking about the first generation, my parents' generation, these women are the same women that attended the Black church, right? And the legacy of women in the church is very strong. They outnumbered the men. And so we're gonna find this pattern even in our communities today, that very strong presence. And then here's another, it's another kind of view of that same space. So when there's programming outside of Jumu'ah or the 5 daily salat, let's say there's a speaker, so it's really important that women have the same access to the programming as do the men. So here we have the men and women seated side by side, right? Or the women's group and then the men's group on the other side. And so I think all of this speaks to the gender progressiveness of the Wd Muhammad community. As I already said, it partly results from our Americanness, just the fact that women's equality is highly valued in our society. But it also largely results from the vision, the wisdom, and the compassion of Imam Wd Muhammad, rahimahullah, who also was known and criticized for his being too American, interestingly. But we can see how that just actually worked in his favor because we were, really experiencing an authentic Islam, which is so important to just like the cultural relevance of Islam for ourselves. So this slide is looking at stats on women's or mosques that have the partition between the men and the women. So I want to further explain why or how we can see Imam Muhammad's gender progressiveness. So a national masjid study actually led by Dr. Sam Bagby in 2000, which was around the time when I was doing research for my book, it showed that 80% of immigrant masjids have a partition, whereas 30% of African-American masjids have a partition. So most African-American masjids don't have a partition. And then if you look within the African-American communities at those that have, okay, let's go back. Okay, so when you look within those African-American communities, those without a partition, 84% of those are WD Muhammad masjids, whereas 55% of non-WDM masjids have no partition, right? So what we're seeing here is that still, for the most part, Black Muslim communities are kind of still working under those kind of cultural practices, right, of women having this free space. But you're also seeing that communities outside of the Wd Muhammad community, many of them are influenced by those immigrant communities, and they're showing those patterns that we see more in immigrant communities. So what's really important to realize here is that Imam Wd Muhammad, he is certainly reputed and known for his transition from the Nation of Islam to Al-Islam. And that is what he's most celebrated and valued for by his community and those who were part of that transition. At the same time, what he's also celebrated for is his focus and attention to women's leadership. And that's something that I studied and wrote about in my book, co-authored book, Women of the Nation. I am going to stop sharing for a moment. So the Nation of Islam, it had an influence, or the woman's influence in the nation, the women's focus in the Nation of Islam was on the home, being excellent homemakers and nurturers. So Imam Wd Muhammad, he encouraged women to pursue their education and work outside the home. So giving examples of how he was thinking and challenging those gender norms of the Nation of Islam. And one thing he did was that he opened minister classes to women in May of 1975. So he made the transition. His father passed in February of 1975. So by May of 1975, he appointed the first female minister, Sister Amatullah Umrani. At that time, her name was Sister Sherilyn X. He appointed her as the first female minister, and she didn't actually head a mosque, but he invited her to pen a regular column in the Muhammad Speaks newspaper entitled Minister Sherilyn. And so the point here that the Imam was making is that women have the equal capacity of men to acquire knowledge and to teach it. Imam Wd Muhammad, he immediately made changes during the transition. For instance, the community members were practicing the 5 pillars in the first year, 1975. However, there were some less urgent aspects that he changed more gradually. And one of those was changing the label of minister to imam. He did that in 1977. So before that, so I already mentioned that he appointed the woman minister. So after that change to imam, because there's no such thing as women imams, he gave the title instructress to women who were appointed as teachers in the community. So again, just looking at his intentionality in positioning women as religious leaders, right, through these terms. Also, in his first year, in 1975, he appointed Sister Anna Karim as the first female editor of the Muhammad Speaks newspaper, which would soon change to the Bilalian News. The name was changed. So Anna Karim's story is quite exceptional. She was a former SNCC activist, and I really encourage you to read about her in my book. And also I've written about her for Sapelo Square, so you can also find her story there, but just a really fascinating story. So I mentioned that the Imam changed the role of women beyond the home. He extended it beyond the home. So to mark that, he established service, or the Committee to Enhance the Role of Women in Society. So this is really phenomenal when you think about it. He established one of the earliest Black Muslim women-led organizations between 1977 and 1978 through service. And this organization had, it had a national scale. And so in my book, I tell the story of Sister Kyria, who was the president of the Atlanta chapter. So they had several chapters across the nation. And just like everything with the Nation of Islam, right? Things were at a national level. So this kind of continued within, under the leadership of Imam Wd Muhammad. And so I tell the story of Sister Kyria, who was the president of the Atlanta chapter. And she talks about how there was a lot of resistance from brothers in the community to resistance to this particular women's organization service. And so to put it nicely and respectfully, because these are my elders, I would say that they certainly had to adjust to the idea of women being leaders and being very vocal. And the women had the backing of Imam Muhammad, so that really helped. But one positive aspect of some of the resistance that was met by the women is that they learned early on that they had to establish organizations that were surely affiliated with the Masjid community, but also branched out beyond that community, right? And so I'm even just thinking now how it's a nice parallel, even in like the focus on the home and moving beyond the home. Imam Muhammad was still talk about women having a special type of leadership that was very much still connected to their unique role as women and mothers. But nonetheless, it was a form of leadership that was moving outside of the domestic space. So similarly, they were finding that even within their Masjid communities, you know, they had to reach out or extend beyond the community. And so all of this is just really speaking to a culture of women's leadership and strong critical presence in the Masjid and in the larger spaces tied to the Masjid, including the arts. And I'm gonna share my screen again. Okay. To give an example of how we see this presence in the arts. So this is living in Islam that is culturally relevant, and especially to Black people, to African Americans, that this is very clear that you can be Black and Muslim. You can be who you are authentically. And I think this is one of the quintessential contributions of the Wd Muhammad community. So here's enjoy this piece, and then we'll talk about it.
We believe in Allah, and in our state. We believe in the angels. He sends our way, yeah. We believe in the prophets and the messengers. He sends to mankind with guidance so true. Oh, boy, I hear you. Y'all sound good. Oh, yeah. Let me hear you again.
Okay, so here we see again, a piece that's capturing the Islam is culturally relevant and also centering women. Here, this Muslim woman, Black Muslim artist, is creating Muslim art within a long-standing tradition of jazz and blues. And she feels comfortable doing it as a woman. And you can see the audience does too. So that's why I really wanted to spend some time even observing the audience and just how natural and comfortable it was and is for that community. I want to read a paragraph from my book, Women of the Nation, that I think further gives us an understanding, it's a visual from a visual via words of the kinds of priorities for this community and the kinds of causes that these women are championing as they serve their communities. So the first generation of women in the WDM community, those who made the transition from Imam Muhammad, have laid the cultural foundation of WDM masjids, that's Warthi masjids. They have lived the lives of American women, most working outside the home while raising families. Raising Muslim children in a Muslim home was a primary concern. They have continued certain dietary traditions from the nation: bean soup, bean pie, and wheat bread instead of white. They have brought their personal strivings into the WDM Masjid, the main location for cultivating community life for themselves and their families. They have had a range of committees and groups to choose from to do their work, local and national. And so they have had many roles from which to contribute: teachers, directors, fundraisers, consultants, lecturers, event planners, cooks, writers, and artists. The type of activities in which women have carried out these roles include founding and running full-time Muslim schools and Sunday school programs, organizing Muslim fashion shows, organizing community workshops on a range of topics from health to domestic violence, establishing shelters for Muslim women and children, planning national WDM community conventions, participating in interfaith outreach, sponsoring Muslim youth organizations, producing Muslim television shows, leading Girl and Boy Scouts troops, feeding the homeless, and protesting the establishment of liquor stores in the area surrounding the masjid. So just to give you a sense of the kind of work that these women are doing, that, again, part of this culturally relevant Islam that has to be relevant for themselves and has to feel right for themselves is also one where there's attention to the community, really even starting with the family and the community around them, and making sure that they are doing work to elevate in that space, right? And to produce in that space. So with that, I want to look at some of the women's organizations and also the thought leaders and scholars that I really believe come out of this strong tradition. And this is going to include women not directly from the Wd Muhammad community, some, but not all. Still though, I think that we all are a part of this common cultural tradition. You know, again, just from being American, being Black American, but also I would say the very critical and expansive role and influence of the Wd Muhammad community on these other communities. But even more than that, just the way that so many of these different communities, so let's say the ones that come out of the different groups that Imam Zaid talks about, that in a given city, you know, all these Black Muslims, yes, in these different masajid and from these different communities, we're still finding these moments to connect just because we are Black and we are Muslim. So to give a perfect example, if in Atlanta, there's only one African-American Muslim high school and it's named after Imam Wd Muhammad. So even we found that people in Imam Jamil El-Amin's community, who had some definitely differences in practice and thought compared to the Wd Muhammad community. Nonetheless, many of them would send their children to our school, and I'm a graduate of Wd Muhammad High. And so they would do so because at the end of the day, our primary focus is elevating, teaching, nurturing Muslim children, Muslim families, Muslim communities. So you were always going to find those links, and we're all in that struggle to do that, given many of the obstacles that we face in this society. So we are all connected. So the first group I want to highlight is the group that I already talked about, the Committee to Enhance the Role of Women in Society. And now there are just a couple of chapters of that organization existing, but they're still here. And this particular one, this chapter is out of Charlotte, started under the leadership of Imam Wd Muhammad in the 70s, a long history of community service, including serving lunch at homeless shelters. And here we have a photo of Jenna Abdulkadir, the chairperson of that group. Rahma, founded in 2012 in Washington, D.C., provides HIV education in Muslim and interfaith community and works to end female genital mutilation and cutting. And the founder and executive director is Khadija Abdullah. Sisters Unite in Human Service, which is located in Atlanta. And I've talked about Sister Khairia as she was the president of the Atlanta chapter of Service. So that's her picture, Rahimahullah, at the top. Founded in Atlanta in 1998, provides social services for the community, including feeding the homeless, health support, and leadership training. Muslim Arc, founded in 2014, provides racial justice, education, and resources, and foster a multiracial network and solutions to advance racial equity and justice. And we know the founder, co-founder, Marguerite Aziza Hill, and executive director. And I really think that it's important to note here, because I think Muslim Arc is one of the most known of these organizations, especially in the moment that we're in. And it's just really great to see that it's women who are leading these great causes. Muslim Wellness Foundation, the same can be said for this organization. Its founder and president is Dr. Camila Rashad, based in Philadelphia, promotes emotional well-being in the Muslim community through dialogue, education, and training. And she's most known for putting on the Black Muslim Psychology Conference with Dr. Donna Austin, which has just been truly exceptional. Sapelo Square, an online forum, celebrates the experiences of Black Muslims in the US and creates new understandings of who they are, what they have done, and why that matters. Its founder and senior editor is Dr. Suad Abdul Khabir, also the author of Muslim Cool. Black Muslim Girl Fly, the founder is Nia Malika Dixon, gives spotlight to Black Muslim girls and women who create screenplays, film, television, and digital content that shares authentic and diverse narratives. Philadelphia Ramadan and Eid Fund organizes Philadelphia Eid in the Park Festival, which last year attracted 15,000 guests. This year, due to COVID, distributed 250 boxes of fresh produce and halal meat in Ramadan, and its founder and executive director is Salima Suswell. We have so many young women. Muslima Al-Nisa Shelter, this is one of our elders, right? Asma Hanif, founder and executive director. She provides housing, occupational, medical, and educational support and resources to homeless Muslim women and children and domestic violence victims in the Baltimore area. Women in Islam, again, one of our forerunners. Founded in 1992, organizes initiatives that increase collective knowledge of women in Islam, nationally and internationally. Aisha Aldawiyah, founder and president. Mu'eed Inc., a San Francisco Bay Area-based organization since 1993, dedicated to providing food and other resources to needy communities. Its founder is Amila Al-Amin. Southside Community Services, founded in 2011 in Chicago, provides food, clothing, and furniture to senior citizens, children, and families. Khalila Abdul is the executive director. And so this is just a sample of women's organizations. There are countless others all across the nation. Now I want to highlight scholars, academics, and authors. We have a very well-known Aisha Prime, scholar and educator, founder of nonprofit Sisterhood in Action, executive director of Barakat Inc., empowering Muslim and youth with the Foundation of Islam. And during this period of COVID, we've been graced with her dynamic lectures. So we get a lot of her through Zoom. Dr. Deborah Majid, Professor Emerita of Philosophy and Religious Studies, Beloit College, author Polygyny, What It Means When African-American Muslim Women Share Their Husbands, and Intisar Ra, Professor of Law and History, which Imam Fahim already highlighted in his talk. Academics and authors, and I am so honored to be on this slide with these two women. I didn't put myself on there. This was co-created. So, Amina Wadud and Dr. Amina and Dr. Amina Beverly McLeod have to be the first two African-American Muslim women to earn their PhD in Islamic studies. And so, so we know Amina Wadud, I have her book right here, Quran and Woman. I would also say that her book has to be among the first to really focus on women in the Quran and looking at controversial topics around women in the Quran, you know, and talking about our sensibilities as Americans right there. You know, there are a lot of questions that we sometimes have because of again, this emphasis on women's equality. And so trying to figure out like, how do I look at this, right? So she was the first to really take on some of those hard questions around women in the Quran. And then Dr. Amina Beverly McLeod, her book was published in 1995. Both these books were published in the 90s. And I was in college at this time. And I would soon go on to graduate school. And so I'm mentioning all that to say that these women are very influential in my work and just creating that path to do this kind of work. And so when you look at Amina McLeod's African-American Islam, it has to be the first book that looks at these communities that we were talking about. She has a chapter, Contemporary Communities, in the 90s, and covers the Ahmadiyya, the Ansarullah Nubian Islamic Hebrews, the Islamic Party of North America, of course, Ladar al-Islam, the Nation of Islam, Wd Muhammad, and the World Community of Islam in the West. And then she mentions Louis Farrakhan, but ends with Sufi communities, the Naqshbandiyya, as well as the Tijani community. So she has really, she's among those women who have laid the foundation for me to do contemporary work on communities, which actually did it now, it's almost 20 years ago. I was in the field in 2002, looking at relations between African-American and immigrant Muslims, South Asian, Desi Muslims in particular. And it was happening right after 9/11. So I explore, a lot. I explore what that meant too, or it was certainly these tensions and relationships were manifesting in really interesting ways right after 9/11. And you can kind of see the convergence of the work of Amina McLeod and Amina Wadud, focusing on women, also looking at race in these communities, and then even expanding beyond and looking at immigrant communities. So definitely, they are forerunners. And I'm going to end here. Again, these are just a sample of some of the journalists, thought leaders, and chaplains who are continuing this work. Aisha K. Mustafa has already been highlighted, editor of the Muslim Journal Weekly since January 1989, Precious Rashida Muhammad, scholar, writer, interfaith activist, and thought leader, and Khadija Mateen, chaplain, spiritual leader, and counselor in New York. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamila. There's so much more that we can probably go into, but unfortunately we're way over time. But that's okay, because what we're going to do is we're going to put a timestamp associated with the video so that people could just sort of focus on certain segments of the webinar if they can't watch the whole thing. So I want us to keep going. One of the things that I'm going to make sure happens is that we have a lot of people watching this, is particularly the folks at ISNA, ICNA, and all of these other places where they have conferences, to make sure that the next conferences that we are truly representing the whole ummah, and that we have equal number of people representing the African American, Arab American, and Pakistani American communities in these conversations, because we can benefit so much from each other. I think there needs to be that cross-pollination in a very real way. I think it's already happening with younger people. I really do, with people at Ishaq's age and Rahima and other people. But I think it needs to happen also in my generation and the generation, that came before me, and then that's right after me as well. I don't think that it's happening as much as it should, because we just don't know. We don't know this information, and we're just beginning to learn. So I have a quick question for Imam Fahim, Imam Zaid, and actually for you, Jamila, if you want to jump in. I was really curious about the comment that Imam Zaid made about Sunniism in quotations, and I wanted to know if there was a distinction between the Sunni Islam that I practice versus the Sunni Islam that was practiced by the Orthodox African Americans versus the Sunni Islam that is practiced by the Wd Muhammad community. I didn't understand that comment, Imam Zaid, and I just wanted you to clarify that comment, and then Imam Fahim to sort of jump in.
I'll explain it, but I was in the international webinar. You know what the international webinar is?
No.
Webinar. When you're involved in it, you're Russian, and when it's all over, you're Finnish. But I mentioned that I said in quotations just because of the lineage, if you will, that many of the groups, that some of them repeated by Dr. Jamila, did not come directly through the lineage of the Nation of Islam, and then when the transition occurred under Imam Wd Muhammad in 1975, that was a different lineage. That's all. The end result is the same. There might be, as Dr. Jamila mentioned in explaining, members of Imam Jamil Al-Amin's community sending their children to the Wd Muhammad High School, that there might have been differences in terms of emphasis, more emphasis on this or that aspect of the teaching. But the end result, the end result is the same, just that the trajectories were different. And so I just wanted to emphasize the difference of the trajectory. Those who ended up becoming Sunni Muslims as a consequence of probably one of the greatest mass conversions in human history. Because if we can all agree that what the nation, for whatever reason, wasn't Islam per se, a lot of, especially the ethics, especially rooted in Islam, but if that community that was not practicing Islam, Aqidah wise, etc., by the book, if you will, then become Sunni Muslims, then upwards to 500,000 people, Imam Fahim and Dr. Jamila can correct me, coming from the theology of the Nation of Islam into the theology of Sunni Islam, that would have to be reckoned as one of the greatest mass conversions in human history.
Absolutely.
And so emphasizing the difference of the trajectory. Some ended up being Sunni as a result of the guidance and teachings of the movement that was orchestrated by Elijah Muhammad, and then culminating in the work of his son, Imam Wd Muhammad. And some came to be Sunnis as a result of Sheikh Dawood Faisal as a result of Sheikh Wali Akram or Dr. Izzuddin, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I meant.
But we're talking about the same Sunni that I happen to be Sunni.
The end result is the recipe was different, but the cake is the same.
Okay, Imam Fahim, did you want to say, or Dr. Jamila, do you have a comment that you wanted to make? You have to unmute yourself, Imam Fahim.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. It's I concur, but I think that there is an element. It's like if you're baking a cake, to stay with that metaphor, if you're baking a cake, well, there's a certain how can you say timing that the ingredients have to be put in together, or it's not going to be the same. So if I mix the wet stuff with the dry stuff before I'm supposed to mix the wet stuff with the dry stuff, I got the same ingredients, but the way it's been put together does not come out as a result in the same. So I'm saying I concur that the aspirations of us is the same, and the sources that we identify with is the same. But there is some some of the critical pieces which I mentioned in the last webinar that we had. There's some very serious active ingredients that need to be looked at and unpacked as relates to the Nation of Islam, and what the transition was not simply a transition from Yaqub's history, let's say, for example, into Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. There's a relationship between what was actually going on before, literally, we can stay with today's circumstances, quarantine. The Nation of Islam was under quarantine. And under quarantine, all of those external influences, which were not always good, did not reach us while we were in quarantine. So when we came out of that quarantine and began to embrace al-Islam properly, there were certain inflections that we didn't have to unlearn or deal with or worry about, because we had been given an autonomy of thought and perspective that enabled us to look at the Quran and not through the eyes of any other scholar or any other line of knowledge. So there's a little bit of a difference, though, inshallah, only Allah knows the taqwa. But in the end, yes, we were trying to get to the same, and are still trying to get to the same destiny. But there's more unpacking that needs to be done for what that really meant.
Dr. Jamila, how is that different than any other kind of Islam around the world? I mean, isn't Islam filtered through the people that live it, the way that they understand Islam, and how does the Wd Muhammad community today see Islam that is any different than the way that Egyptian Muslims see Islam, or Saudi Muslims see Islam, or Indonesians, or any other community?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you study Islam from a historical perspective, and especially looking at the ways that Islam expanded or became a part of a society, what many scholars call the Islamization process, you'll find similarities where you'll find similarities to the Nation of Islam, where at first there were not what we might call the Islam that we're practicing today, or there might be some elements of other religious traditions, this kind of a mixture of religions or practices when Islam is first taking root in a culture, and you'll find that throughout the world, right? And then and you also find these moments of certain types of mass conversions, right, due to political, cultural, economic circumstances. So it is very fascinating and rich to look at that process. And I remember doing that in graduate school, and it was so inspiring, and really just it just filled me with awe, and filled me with, it was a very sacred thing to me to think about the way that Allah takes into consideration people as they are, when this message is brought to them, right? Again, like I said before, you don't have to be culturally different to be a Muslim.
Right.
So I think, in terms of how other people around the world are living their faith, I think it's really beautiful to bring this up in this season of Hajj, right? Because that is certainly the symbol or manifestation of all these different cultural groups coming together for this common purpose and having a common experience that transcends culture. But at the same time, we're wearing our cultural garb, or we're speaking our language, at least the women are, but we're speaking our language and et cetera. So absolutely, I think that we should really begin to see ourselves, to see American Muslim communities in that light of this long history of Islam.
Dr. Omar Farooq Abdullah has a great paper on Islam and the cultural imperative that addresses this. And he quotes a beautiful hadith about how Islam takes the color of the soil that it is embedded in. That's a long hadith. I don't know the full hadith, but that's essentially what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think what both Dr. Jamil and what Imam Fahim said is important. And I'm trying to say the same thing, but I still would say that within this Sunni house, there are rooms where there particular things are emphasized more than others. They might be cultural, they might be ethical, they might be, but the foundations in terms of religion, theology, prayers, sources of knowledge are generally the same. And the tafsir of Imam Muhammad, that's, I think, the roots of it is drawing from the same roots, but it has a very unique tree and very unique fruit. But and that's global. Malaysian Islam, if you will, is not a carbon copy of African Islam, even though they're Sunnis. Malaysians historically are Shafi'is, but their Shafi'i fiqh and the way that they approach the madhab differs from the Kurds, who are also historically Shafi'i. So in terms of dress, in terms of food, and the way that Malays, their gender relations are very fluid and open, and they're Shafi'is, they're Ash'ari, as opposed to gender relations amongst the Palestinians or historical Shafi'is. And so I think those differences and emphasis are found in our community also due to historical circumstances. That's all I was trying to say.
Yeah, and then you also have the Shia community, which is something that I learned from the Medina Institute webinar, the 2-hour webinar that they had. I had no idea that there was, a huge percentage of African Americans are also Shia, and there's diversity within that community as well. So thank you so much, all of you. I'm going to turn it now to Ishaq, who's going to just do a quick close for us.
Thank you. And thank you so much. It was really amazing to hear from all three of you in relation to the specific elements of the community that now have, that historically and at present have such a huge role in the American Muslim community, as well as in the greater American community on a whole. So I do want to thank you all so much for taking time with us today and sharing your wisdom and knowledge, and we really appreciate it. I know that you're going to be back with us on future webinars for the series, and we do look forward to that, and we hope that God rewards you immensely. As I mentioned earlier in my introduction, this is a series of 5 webinars. So I did just want to show the next 3 webinars that are coming up. They're 2 weeks. The next one is 2 weeks from now, Wednesday, August 12th, 5 to 6 p.m. That is on the roots of racism and how structural racism functions. And that will have several panelists from many different backgrounds, including South Asian, East Asian, African American, Latinx, Indigenous, and Jewish. So it will be a very fulfilling panel to watch. The next session after that is going to center in a little bit more on racism in Muslim American communities today, now that we have kind of a set of education of where the African American community is now in their history. And then the last webinar will be on September 9th, and that's on calls to actions. How can we counter internalized racism that we all have, regardless of our backgrounds? If you have any questions or comments on anything in relation to the webinars, you can feel free to write to mail@ing.org. Anything you write to us will receive a response via the email. So other than that, I just want to thank everyone. I'm going to stop sharing. And I know that we are approaching, this is a very holy time for Muslims. And I want to wish everyone a blessed day of Arafat, which begins tonight, or will begin soon on the Pacific Coast, and a happy early Eid al-Adha, or Festival of the Sacrifice, which Muslims will celebrate on Friday. As a result, it will be a 3-day weekend, which we're all looking forward to. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Have a wonderful night and holiday if you are celebrating.
Assalamu alaikum.